When a human diplomat accidentally walks in on an alien princess while she's changing, he unknowingly violates one of the most sacred taboos of her species. According to her people's laws, he must now either marry her or both of them will face exile, or worse. As political tensions rise between their civilizations, their forced marriage becomes the center of a galactic scandal, with war looming on the horizon if they refuse to comply. But as they navigate the absurdity of alien customs, royal intrigue, and unexpected romance, they start to wonder, was it really an accident, or destiny? Chapter 1. The Diplomatic Incident. The Galactic Concorde's grand halls were an architectural marvel, a seamless blend of technology and artistry that reflected the unity of dozens of interstellar civilizations. It was within these very halls that Ambassador Jonathan Reeves found himself on his first official visit to the planet Zavoria, home to the enigmatic and highly traditional Zevran people. Jonathan had spent weeks studying their customs, memorizing the complex web of etiquette that governed their society. He had been warned that Zavorians held propriety above all else, but nothing could have prepared him for the catastrophe that was about to unfold. After an exhausting day of negotiations, Jonathan had been escorted to his guest quarters, a lavish suite deep within the royal palace. The Zavorian attendants had been meticulous in ensuring his comfort, but in his fatigue, he had misheard the directions to the bathing chamber. Instead of entering his own, he stepped into an adjoining chamber, one that was already occupied. A startled gasp met his ears as he froze in place. Before him stood a Zavorian woman, half-dressed in an elegant ceremonial robe, her iridescent blue skin flushed in shock. Her silver eyes widened in horror before she shrieked, grabbing the nearest object, a silk cushion, and hurling it at him. Jonathan stumbled back, hastily averting his eyes. "I'm so sorry. This is a mistake, I didn't mean to." Before he could finish his sentence, guards stormed into the chamber, weapons drawn. The woman, now frantically wrapping the robe around herself, pointed at him with a trembling hand. "He saw me unclothed." The guards exchanged horrified glances. One of them, a towering Zavorian clad in ceremonial armor, stepped forward and bellowed, "By the sacred laws of our ancestors, you have committed the gravest transgression." Jonathan raised his hands in surrender. "Wait, hold on. I swear it was an accident." The woman's face was now a deep shade of indigo, her embarrassment clear. She took a deep breath and met his gaze with an air of forced composure. "You are human. You may not know our ways, but what you have done has bound us together." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Bound? What do you mean bound?" The guard's expression was grim. "By law, the only way to rectify this offense is for you to marry Princess Alara." Jonathan blinked. What?" Chapter 2. A Royal Decree. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a vibroblade. Jonathan felt the weight of 100 unspoken consequences pressing down on him. He had come to Zavoria as a diplomat, hoping to strengthen ties between humanity and the Zavorian people. Now he was apparently engaged to their princess. Alara straightened her posture, her expression unreadable. "If we do not wed, it would be seen as a grave insult to my people. Worse, it could be interpreted as an act of dishonor upon my house." Jonathan took a shaky breath. "Surely there's another way? A formal apology? A diplomatic solution?" The guard who had spoken before shook his head. "To refuse is to defy the ancient laws. The punishment for such a dishonor is exile, or death." Jonathan paled. "Death? Seriously?" Alara, despite her own clear distress, nodded. "It is an archaic law, but one my people hold sacred. If word of this incident spreads, the nobles will demand that we adhere to tradition. There is no avoiding it." Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. "So, my choices are marrying you or facing exile. Or worse." "That's insane." Alara's expression softened just a fraction. "I understand your hesitation, but we must make a decision soon. If we marry, we can find a way to navigate this together. If we refuse, it will be out of our hands." Jonathan exhaled, glancing between the guards and Alara. He barely knew her. He hadn't come here expecting to be forced into a political marriage. And yet, as he looked into her silver eyes, he saw the weight of responsibility she carried. She didn't want this any more than he did, but duty bound her. A voice from the hallway broke the silence. "His Majesty King Vareth summons you both at once." Jonathan felt his stomach sink. As he and Alara were escorted to the royal chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed forever. Chapter 3. A Diplomatic Emergency. The tension in the grand hall of the High Court was suffocating. The moment the declaration had been made, that an accidental viewing of a Zalari's unclothed form was equivalent to a binding marriage, Ethan's heart sank into his stomach. The towering, regal figures of the Zalari Council sat in judgment, their eyes glowing softly beneath ornate ceremonial headdresses. Human, one of the elders, a female named Vareshi, intoned. You are now bound to Princess Zalira by the rights of our ancestors. This union cannot be undone. Ethan glanced at Zalira, the stunning alien woman who moments ago had been just a stranger. Now she was apparently his wife-to-be. Her deep violet skin flushed an even darker hue, her twin ridges above her eyebrows twitching in discomfort. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Ethan said, his voice tight. This was an accident. I didn't mean to. There is no room for interpretation, Vareshi interrupted. The law is clear. The only alternative to refusing this marriage is exile. Permanent exile from Zalari space, and the declaration of dishonor upon the princess. Zalira's golden eyes flickered to him, filled with apprehension. Dishonor? Ethan didn't want to wreck her life over an unfortunate accident. But being forced into marriage wasn't exactly high on his list either. I believe we require a moment to confer, came the smooth voice of Ambassador Clark, the human diplomat present at the proceedings. The ambassador, a seasoned man with graying hair, gestured for Ethan to step aside. Ethan, Clark muttered, keeping his voice low. This is bad. The Zalari take their customs very seriously. If you reject this, it could spark a major diplomatic incident. Ethan rubbed his temples. There has to be another way out of this. I don't think you understand, Clark said. This isn't just an old-fashioned marriage tradition. It's a political matter. If the princess is dishonored, it could destabilize relations between our species. That's the last thing we need. Ethan exhaled slowly, then looked at Zalira. And what do you want? Zalira hesitated, clearly conflicted. She sighed. I do not wish for dishonor, nor do I wish to force you into a union against your will. Ethan gritted his teeth. Then let's find another solution. Together. Chapter 4. The Trial of Worthiness. As it turned out, there was another way out. If Ethan could prove his worthiness. The Zalari had an ancient tradition. If a bonded pair wished to avoid marriage, they had to undergo the trial of worthiness, an ordeal that would determine whether Ethan was fit to stand beside Zalira in the first place. If he failed, the marriage was final. Great. The trial consisted of 3 challenges: strength, honor, and wisdom. Ethan's first challenge was a combat trial. He stood in an arena facing a Zalari warrior twice his size. The warrior lunged, swinging an electrified staff. Ethan barely dodged in time, rolling to the side. You must land 3 strikes upon your opponent, Zalira called from the sidelines. Do not die. Very helpful, thanks, Ethan muttered. The warrior attacked relentlessly, but Ethan's quick reflexes kept him just ahead of the strikes. Finally, he used his agility to his advantage, ducking under a swing and planting a solid punch to the warrior's side. 1 strike down. 2 more to go. The second challenge, honor, involved a test of ethics. Ethan was presented with a scenario involving trade negotiations, deceit, and loyalty. The Zalari believed honor was not just about combat but about integrity. Ethan navigated the challenge carefully, ensuring fairness and honesty without backing himself into a corner. Finally, wisdom. This was a mental puzzle, an ancient Zalari riddle that had no clear solution. Only insight. Ethan pondered it, thinking outside the box, and finally presented an answer that satisfied the elders. With all 3 challenges passed, Ethan turned to Zalira. So, do I get an out? She studied him for a long moment. Then to his surprise she smirked. Perhaps, but you are more worthy than I expected, human. Ethan wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or a warning. Either way, he wasn't off the hook yet. Chapter 5. The Bonding Ceremony. Ethan had barely caught his breath when Vareshi announced, the final trial begins at dawn. Final trial? Ethan echoed, looking to Zalira for clarification. The bonding ceremony, she explained. It is the last test. If we pass, we are bound as true partners whether or not we choose marriage. Ethan swallowed hard. And what happens if we fail? Zalira's expression turned grim. Then we must marry immediately. Ethan let out a nervous chuckle. Great. No pressure. The bonding ceremony was a test of trust and unity. Ethan and Zalira had to work together to complete a sacred task, retrieving the orb of Selrath from the depths of the Zalari sacred caverns. The task required navigating treacherous tunnels, avoiding deadly creatures and proving they could rely on one another. As they ventured into the cavern, Ethan quickly realized that Zalira was an expert navigator, guiding them past pitfalls and unstable rock formations. However, when they reached the chamber housing the orb, a massive beast, resembling a hybrid of a serpent and a scorpion, emerged. Stay behind me, Zalira said, drawing a gleaming energy blade. Like hell, Ethan retorted, grabbing a weapon of his own. The battle was intense, forcing them to coordinate seamlessly. Ethan's agility and Zalira's combat prowess made them an effective team. In the end, they secured the orb and emerged victorious. Chapter 6. A Choice to Make. With the trials complete, Ethan and Zalira stood before the council once more. Vareshi observed them carefully. You have proven your worth, she said. Now you must decide. Ethan glanced at Zalira. What do you want? She hesitated before answering. I wish for a partnership, one built on choice, not obligation. Ethan nodded. Then let's make that choice together. The council granted them a rare alternative, a diplomatic partnership rather than a forced marriage. As they left the chamber, Zalira smirked. You are an interesting human, Ethan. He grinned. You're not so bad yourself. Chapter 7. The Grand Tribunal of Union. The Hall of Celestial Judgments was as vast as it was intimidating. Towering pillars, adorned with shimmering glyphs of ancient rulings, loomed overhead as Ethan and Princess Saria were led toward the center of the chamber. The air hummed with an almost supernatural intensity, the weight of countless millennia of tradition pressing down on them. Saria's hand gripped Ethan's tightly, whether for his sake or her own he wasn't sure. But the warmth of her touch steadied him. Across from them, the High Justicar, a Zalari elder draped in robes woven with celestial silk, surveyed them with piercing golden eyes. The matter before this tribunal is one of utmost consequence, the Justicar intoned. A human has seen the heir of the Zalari Empire unclothed. Per our sacred customs, such an act mandates union or, his gaze darkened. Exile and dishonor. A murmur rippled through the audience. Ethan clenched his jaw. With all due respect, Your Honor, I had no intention of disrespecting the princess. It was an accident. The Justicar's eyes gleamed with something akin to amusement. Intent matters little before the laws of the Zalari. Saria stepped forward, lifting her chin. The laws also allow for challenge, do they not? The murmurs grew louder. Ethan felt a chill creep up his spine. Challenge? What challenge? The Justicar inclined his head. Indeed. The right of proving. But surely you do not mean to invoke it? Saria squared her shoulders. I do. Ethan turned to her. Mind filling me in on what this right of proving entails? She hesitated. A series of trials designed to test the worthiness of a suitor. Trials. His stomach dropped. What kind of trials? The Justicar smiled. Oh, you'll see. Chapter 8. Trial by fire and possibly other horrors. Ethan stood at the edge of the proving grounds, staring at the first trial. A labyrinth of shifting platforms hovering above a lake of molten plasma. Each platform moved unpredictably, some sinking into the heat, others tilting precariously. At the far end, a single glowing sigil marked the exit. Simple, Saria explained, standing beside him. Cross to the other side. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. Simple, huh? Saria gave him a small, almost sheepish smile. For a Zalari, it is a test of balance and reflexes. For a human. Yeah, I get it. Might as well ask me to wrestle a black hole. He took a deep breath. All right. Here goes nothing. With a running start, Ethan leapt onto the first platform. It wobbled beneath his weight. A second later, it began to descend into the fiery abyss. Move. Saria called. He jumped. The next platform wobbled but held. Then the next. He was making progress. Adrenaline surged through him as he focused on the shifting patterns, adjusting his footing with each leap. Then midair he realized he'd miscalculated. The platform he aimed for was already sinking. Oh hell. Just as he braced for an unpleasant end, a burst of energy surged beneath him. He felt himself being lifted, gliding over the lava before landing on a stable surface. He turned eyes wide. Saria was standing at the starting point, her hand outstretched, her energy manipulation abilities shimmering around her. The Justicar's voice echoed. Interference is forbidden. Saria snapped her hand back, biting her lip. Ethan exhaled. It was an accident. Just like, our current predicament. He turned back to the course. I'll do it without help. The next attempt was grueling, but by some miracle and a lot of desperate scrambling, he reached the sigil. The crowd roared. The Justicar nodded approvingly. The first trial is complete. Saria's eyes shone with pride. Not bad for a human. Ethan groaned, rubbing his knees. If this is just the first one, I'm doomed. She smirked. We'll see. Chapter 9. The Unavoidable Consequences. The Grand Chamber of the High Tribunal was silent as the elders processed the gravity of the situation. Aaron, the young human ambassador, stood rigidly next to Kalira, the Zelvori warrior who had accidentally glimpsed him unclothed. The elders' shimmering robes reflected the golden light of the chamber's ethereal torches, their expressions unreadable. The ancient law is clear, intoned Elder Zeloth. Such an occurrence binds your fates irrevocably. A failure to wed would bring forth dishonor upon the House of Lyra and destabilize relations between the Zelvari Empire and humanity. Aaron swallowed hard. With all due respect, Elder, isn't there a way around this? A negotiation? A revision of the law? Elder Zeloth's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Do you believe you are the first to wish to escape this decree, human? Many have tried. None have succeeded. Kalira folded her arms. This is ridiculous. A glance, a mistake, and now we must marry or face exile. The room darkened as Elder Lurith, a venerable Zelvori with bioluminescent patterns shifting across her skin, stepped forward. The law exists to prevent dishonor and maintain societal cohesion. To reject it is to invite chaos. Aaron exhaled sharply. Then we have no choice. Kalira scowled. I have never been one to shy away from duty, but I refuse to be shackled by outdated traditions. Elder Lurith studied her. Then perhaps you should undertake the trial of ascendancy. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Aaron felt a chill settle over him. What's the trial of ascendancy? Kalira's face was grim. It is a combat trial. If we emerge victorious, we can dictate our own terms. If we lose, she hesitated, we will have no choice but to comply. Aaron exhaled. Then we fight. Chapter 10. The Trial of Ascendancy. The arena was packed with thousands of spectators, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in excitement. The Trial of Ascendancy was rarely invoked, and never before had a human participated. The stakes were colossal. If Aaron and Kalira triumphed, they would have the right to challenge the law. If they failed, their marriage would be enforced and their respective peoples would expect full compliance. Aaron adjusted his combat armor. Kalira handed him a ceremonial Zelvari blade. We fight as one, she reminded him. Their opponents entered, two veteran warriors clad in obsidian battle garb. The first was a towering brute with armored plates running down his arms. The second, a lithe, deadly combatant with twin plasma daggers. The gong sounded. Kalira engaged the brute, her spear whirling in a blur of steel and energy. Aaron dodged the swift dagger strikes of his opponent, barely parrying in time. His movements were efficient. Humanity's military training had prepared him well, but the Zelvari were naturally faster, stronger. A blade nicked his cheek. Kalira spun, delivering a brutal strike to the brute's midsection, forcing him back. Aaron ducked a swipe, countering with a strike to his opponent's ribs. The battle was ruthless, unforgiving. Time blurred. Sweat dripped into Aaron's eyes. Kalira shouted. Her opponent faltered for just a moment. Aaron seized the opening, disarming his foe and pressing his blade to their throat. Silence. Then a roar of approval from the crowd. The elders stood, their expressions unreadable. Elder Zeloth finally spoke. You have proven yourselves. The law shall be reconsidered. Aaron looked to Kalira. Relief flickered in her eyes before she quickly masked it. Had they truly won their freedom? Or had they simply walked into an even greater entanglement? Chapter 11. The sacred ceremony approaches. The palace buzzed with activity as preparations for the grand wedding entered their final stages. Human Lieutenant James Carter still couldn't wrap his head around how things had spiraled out of control so quickly. One accidental sighting of Princess Ralvera unclothed, and now he was set to marry her, or face execution. The strict customs of the Zalvari species left him with no choice, but the lingering question in his mind remained. Was this really just an obligation or had something more profound formed between them? Ralvera, on the other hand, had grown increasingly distant, torn between duty and personal feelings. Their conversations had become clipped, their usual witty exchanges replaced by an uneasy tension. The weight of their impending union was pressing down on them both, and James could sense it was more than just formality weighing on her. Meanwhile, political forces within the Zalvari High Court were not content to let the marriage proceed unchallenged. The aristocrats, wary of a human gaining a place of power among them, whispered in hushed circles about potential alternatives. Some suggested exile for James, while others spoke of more permanent solutions. But the queen herself had decreed the marriage would proceed, and to go against her was to challenge the sacred traditions that had governed the Zalvari for centuries. As the wedding drew near, James sought out Ralvera in her private chambers. He found her gazing out over the shimmering skyline of the capital, deep in thought. "We need to talk," he said. She turned, her golden eyes searching his face for a moment before she nodded. "Yes, we do." James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want to be just some political pawn in this. If we go through with this, I want to know what it means to you." Ralvera exhaled softly. "At first I was furious. You saw something that, by our laws, is meant only for one's chosen mate." She turned fully toward him now. "But the more time I've spent with you, the more I've realized something. I don't hate this. I don't hate the idea of us." James felt his heartbeat quicken, but before he could respond, a loud chime rang through the palace halls, the signal that the final wedding preparations were complete. "We will continue this discussion later," Ralvera said, her voice softer now. "For now we must be ready." Chapter 12. Bound by choice, not tradition. The grand ceremonial hall was unlike anything James had ever seen. Towering crystal pillars reflected the warm glow of ceremonial fires, and thousands of Zalvari citizens had gathered to witness the historic union between their princess and the human outsider. Dressed in intricate ceremonial garb, James stood at the altar, waiting for Ralvera to arrive. His mind raced with doubts. Was this the right choice? Could a relationship between them truly work? The doors at the far end of the hall opened and Ralvera entered, adorned in a breathtaking ceremonial robe woven with silken threads of gold and deep violet. She was a vision of regality, but more than that, she was herself, strong, determined, and strikingly beautiful. As she reached the altar, the high priest began the sacred rites. James listened intently, but his focus remained on Ralvera. When the time came for them to exchange vows, she took his hands in hers and spoke in a voice meant only for him. "I have made my choice, James Carter. Not because of tradition but because I believe in us." James felt the last of his hesitation melt away. "Then let's show them what that means." As the ceremony concluded and their fates were sealed, the whispers of the court aristocrats faded into irrelevance. This was no longer about obligation. It was a partnership forged by two individuals who had chosen each other despite the odds. And for the first time since this ordeal began, James smiled, not in nervousness but in certainty. Chapter 13. A pact sealed in fire. The air between Lyanna and Prince Kael crackled with tension. The council had issued its final ruling. Their marriage must take place within 3 days, or the kingdom would risk dishonor and political upheaval. The ancient traditions were unyielding, demanding that the one who saw a noble unclothed either marry them or suffer exile. Lyanna, a knight of unwavering loyalty, had always placed duty above all. She clenched her fists, staring at the grand tapestries in Kael's chamber. The prince himself sat on the edge of his seat, staring at her with unguarded curiosity. "You're not saying anything," he finally said. "Do you hate the idea of marrying me that much?" Lyanna exhaled sharply. "This isn't about hate. It's about duty. And I find it hard to believe you're taking this as seriously as you should." Kael's lips curled into a wry smile. "Oh, I assure you I take this very seriously. I'm just more concerned about what you want." Lyanna blinked. It was the first time anyone had asked her that. Before she could respond, a messenger burst through the door. Your Highness, a delegation from the neighboring kingdom has arrived, led by Lord Ravos. They demand an audience. Liana's spine stiffened at the name. Lord Ravos had long sought to forge an alliance with Kale's kingdom, but his methods were less than honorable. If he learned of this predicament, he might exploit it to seize power. Kale met Liana's gaze. Looks like our problems just got worse. They hurried to the throne room where Ravos, clad in crimson armor, smirked at them both. Ah, Prince Kale, Lady Liana, he drawled, bowing mockingly. I've heard the most fascinating rumors about you two. Liana's grip tightened on her sword. Speak plainly, Lord Ravos. Oh, I shall, he said smoothly. I propose an alternative solution. Rather than a forced marriage, why not have Lady Liana prove her honor? His grin widened. A duel. If she wins, she may walk free. If she loses, she will be mine to do with as I please. Kale's expression darkened. Absolutely not. But Liana had already stepped forward. I accept. Kale turned to her in shock, but she gave him a firm look. I will not be used as a bargaining chip. If I must prove myself, then so be it. Lord Ravos clapped his hands. Excellent. The duel shall be held tomorrow at dawn. As he left, Kale grabbed Liana's arm. You don't have to do this, he said urgently. There's another way. This is my way, she replied. I will decide my own fate. Kale studied her, then sighed. Then at least allow me to fight by your side. Liana hesitated. But then she nodded. Fine. We fight together. And so the pact was sealed. Chapter 14. The Duel at Dawn. The sky blushed with the first rays of sunrise as Liana and Kale stepped into the arena. Lord Ravos stood opposite them, his hand resting lazily on the hilt of his blade. The rules are simple, the officiator announced. If Lady Liana or Prince Kale fall, they forfeit. If Lord Ravos falls, he concedes. Ravos grinned. Shall we begin? The moment the signal was given, Liana lunged. Their swords clashed with a resounding clang. She fought fiercely, her movements precise, honed by years of training. Kale flanked Ravos, forcing him to defend on both sides. But Ravos was no fool. He twisted, sidestepping Kale's attack and locking blades with Liana. You fight well, but you're reckless, he taunted. I'm not the one who will fall, she shot back. Ravos smirked and suddenly switched tactics, sidestepping and kicking Kale's legs out from under him. The prince stumbled, barely catching himself. Liana's heart pounded. She lunged between them, blocking a potentially fatal strike. The crowd gasped as she twisted, using Ravos' own momentum against him. In a flash, she knocked his sword from his grip. Ravos' eyes widened as Liana's blade pressed against his throat. Yield, she commanded. For a moment he hesitated. Then with a furious growl he spat, I yield. The officiator raised his hand. Lady Liana and Prince Kale are victorious. The crowd erupted in cheers. Liana exhaled deeply, lowering her sword. But before she could turn to Kale, he suddenly dropped to one knee before her. Liana, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This entire ordeal made me realize something. I don't have to marry you because of tradition. He looked up at her. I want to marry you. Liana felt her breath hitch. The crowd hushed, watching intently. Kale continued, you've proven your strength, your honor. You don't need to do anything else. But if you would have me, I would be honored to stand beside you, not because of duty but because I respect you. Because he swallowed, then whispered, because I love you. Silence stretched between them. Liana stared at him, her heart hammering. Then with a small rare smile she extended her hand. Then let's face this doom together. And the kingdom rejoiced.